It started with a simple question. One that carried the weight of two nations, two identities, and one man caught between both. On a cool October morning, during a surprise appearance on Hassan Minhaj's podcast, Prince Harry found himself face-to-face with a question that millions had quietly wondered for years. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Hassan, known for his disarming humor, leaned forward with that familiar grin and asked, "Are you going to become a U.S. citizen?" For a split second, the world held its breath. The Duke of Sussex, son of a future king, husband to an American, father of two children born in California, hesitated. Then, with the faintest smile, he said, "Am I going to become a U.S. citizen? There are no plans to be at this point." It was a calm answer, almost casual. But within minutes, the internet exploded. The words were replayed, dissected, and analyzed by royal watchers, journalists, and fans across continents. No plans? Some asked incredulously. At this point, others repeated, trying to decode the subtext. What did he really mean? Was it a polite deflection, or a quiet declaration that despite leaving Britain, Harry was still tied to the crown in ways even he couldn't escape? The truth, as always with Prince Harry, was far more complicated. His answer wasn't just about a passport. It was about belonging. It was about identity. It was about a man who walked away from a centuries-old institution but couldn't quite walk away from himself. The story of Prince Harry's life has always been defined by contrasts. Duty and rebellion, love and loss, tradition and freedom. From the moment he and Meghan Markle stepped down from royal duties in 2020 and moved to California, questions about his future have never stopped. Would he eventually become an American citizen? Would he give up his titles? Would he raise his children as Americans or as distant royals in exile? For many, the idea of Prince Harry as a U.S. citizen symbolized the final break, the closing of a royal chapter that began with his mother, Princess Diana, and ended with him choosing to live outside the crown's reach. But his refusal, however gently phrased, reopened old wounds. It reignited debates about loyalty, heritage, and what it truly means to start over. To understand why his answer carried such weight, one must look back at what led him to this point. When Harry and Meghan first announced their decision to leave the royal family, the world was stunned. Here was the second son of Princess Diana, a man who grew up in palaces under the constant gaze of the press, choosing a new life thousands of miles away. California, with its sunlight and distance from royal formality, represented freedom. But freedom always comes with a cost. At first, Harry seemed open to the idea of fully integrating into his new world. In early interviews, he admitted that he had considered becoming an American citizen. It seemed natural. His wife was American. His children were born in the United States. His foundation, his work, his new identity, all of it was tied to his adopted home. Yet something held him back. And when he finally spoke those words on the podcast, it became clear that despite living in California, part of him was still very much tied to Britain. What struck listeners most wasn't just the answer, but the way he delivered it. There was no anger, no defensiveness, just quiet finality. The kind of tone that said, "I've thought about this, and for now, I've made my peace." It was the same tone he used when speaking about his mother in his memoir, or when describing his military service. Honest, direct, but also guarded, as if protecting something fragile behind the words. The timing of the comment was also telling. As Harry continues his life in America, his relationship with the British monarchy remains strained. His father, King Charles, is navigating both personal health challenges and the ongoing public tension surrounding Harry and Meghan's choices. The British press has often portrayed Harry's move as a betrayal, an abandonment of tradition for celebrity and comfort. Meanwhile, in America, he is viewed by some as a symbol of reinvention and resilience, and by others as a man still defined by the privilege he claims to have left behind. When Harry said he had no plans to become a citizen, it seemed to confirm a truth that had long been whispered. He is caught between worlds. He can never fully return to the life he left behind, but he may never truly belong to the one he's built in California. In that sense, His response wasn't just about paperwork or politics, it was about identity. For a man born into a life of ceremony, where every move was choreographed and every statement vetted, becoming an American citizen would have been the ultimate act of defiance. But it also would have meant letting go of one of the last threads tying him to his family, his lineage, and his mother's legacy. There's also the quiet reality of what citizenship would cost him. The moment Prince Harry were to take the oath of allegiance to the United States, he would be pledging loyalty to another nation. For a private individual, that may seem symbolic. But for a member of the royal family, even one who has stepped back, it carries enormous implications. It would mean publicly renouncing allegiance to the king, his own father. It would complicate diplomatic relations, his security arrangements, and his standing within the British system of titles and inheritance. Those practical concerns may seem cold compared to the emotional and symbolic ones, but they are very real. It's one thing to live abroad. It's another to legally redefine who you are in the eyes of two nations. And Prince Harry, for all his efforts to distance himself from the monarchy, has never gone so far as to sever the ties completely. His answer, "No plans at this point," was not just a statement of fact but a signal. It told the world he may have left the palace, but he hasn't left his roots. Still, his choice sparked new speculation about what the future holds. Could this mean that he intends to return to royal life someday? Or is it simply that he doesn't want to risk another storm of headlines by taking such a drastic step? Either way, the world is watching. In the hours after the podcast aired, social media filled with reactions ranging from admiration to outrage. Some praised Harry's restraint, saying it showed he still respected his heritage. Others accused him of hypocrisy, enjoying the benefits of American life without fully committing to it. There were also those who saw his decision as a quiet act of diplomacy, a way to maintain bridges on both sides of the Atlantic. Whatever one's opinion, one thing was certain. The Duke of Sussex remains a figure who commands attention, not because of what he says, but because of what he represents. He is a man in transition, still searching for peace between the world he left and the one he's built. His refusal to become a citizen is less about rejection and more about preservation. Preserving his past, his identity, and perhaps a future he hasn't yet defined. It's hard not to think of his mother when analyzing his decision. Princess Diana once said that she wanted her sons to grow up as normal as possible, to experience the real world beyond palace walls. In many ways, Harry fulfilled that wish, but in doing so, he inherited the same loneliness that haunted her. Freedom, after all, is not the same as belonging. There's also the question of his children, Archie and Lilibet. Born in America, they hold U.S. citizenship by birthright. If Harry were to become a citizen, it would bring the family's legal status full circle. But his choice to remain a British national suggests that he still wants his children to have a tangible connection to their royal lineage. They may not grow up in palaces or wear titles day to day, but their father's decision ensures that the door to that world remains open. By the end of the podcast, Hassan Minhaj moved on to the next question, laughing and lightening the mood. But for the audience, the moment lingered. It was a brief glimpse into the heart of a man whose life has become a constant negotiation between past and present. For Harry, every public statement is more than a soundbite. It's a reflection of a battle that began long before he ever stepped onto American soil. He may not have intended to spark controversy, but he did. His refusal to take the American oath of citizenship reminded everyone that even in exile, he remains bound by invisible chains, the weight of his name, the echo of his mother's legacy, the shadow of the crown. And perhaps that is what makes him so fascinating to watch. For now, Prince Harry remains a man without a nation in the fullest sense. Loved in two countries, questioned in both. Caught between loyalty and liberty. His journey, like his answer, is still unfinished. And while he may say there are no plans at this point, the world knows that plans can change, especially when it comes to a man who's made a life out of defying expectations. The real question isn't whether Harry will ever become a U.S. citizen. It's whether he will ever truly find a place to call home. The studio lights were warm and intimate, the kind that make even the most guarded guest relax for a moment. Hassan Minhaj had built his reputation on sharp humor and fast questions, and Prince Harry seemed ready for it. The Duke of Sussex was in a good mood, smiling, joking, looking far more at ease than in any of the stiff royal interviews of his past. It was meant to be a light-hearted segment, royal rapid fire, Minhaj called it, but no one in the room could have predicted how one question would slice through the laughter and silence the world. "Are you going to become a U.S. citizen?" Hassan asked casually, leaning back with that familiar grin. The audience chuckled. Harry smiled too, maybe expecting this question at some point. But then he paused. For a man who's faced armies of photographers and lived through some of the most merciless media storms of his generation, that brief moment of hesitation felt louder than words. "Am I going to become a U.S. citizen?" he repeated, glancing down briefly before looking up again. There are no plans to be at this point. No dramatic tone. No political flourish. Just calm, measured honesty. But that calmness only amplified the impact. The air in the studio changed. The laughter faded, replaced by the kind of quiet that only comes when something unexpectedly real has just been said. For a few seconds, Hassan didn't know how to follow up. The crowd wasn't sure whether to laugh, clap, or stay silent. And then Harry smiled again, breaking the tension, shifting the energy back to friendly banter. But the moment had already escaped into the digital world, clipped, shared, and looped within minutes. On Twitter, one comment summed up the collective reaction. That pause said everything. It wasn't just another podcast answer. It was a declaration wrapped in restraint. For years, speculation about Prince Harry's next move had filled tabloids and talk shows alike. Would he officially leave behind his British citizenship? Would he embrace his new life in America completely? Would he let go of the royal past that still defined him? And now, in a few quiet words, he had answered them all. What makes this moment so gripping is not what he said but the context surrounding it. This wasn't Harry sitting across from Oprah in a formal interview or reading from a prepared statement. This was a casual podcast, unscripted, unfiltered, the kind of setting where truths have a way of slipping out. It's in these offhand moments that people reveal what they truly believe, and Harry's response suggested that despite everything, he still sees himself as a man of the crown, even if he lives oceans away from it. Within hours, the segment went viral. Headlines flooded social media feeds. Prince Harry rules out U.S. citizenship, for now. Some news outlets focused on the phrase at this point, calling it a sign of hesitation or a possible future reversal. Others interpreted it as a polite refusal, an elegant way of saying no without closing the door forever. For his supporters, the comment was proof that Harry was maintaining balance between his past and present. He wasn't abandoning Britain, nor was he rushing to fully Americanize himself. He was, as always, caught between worlds. But critics saw it differently. To them, his refusal was evidence of hypocrisy, enjoying the freedoms of America while clinging to the privileges of royalty. As the story spread, analysts and royal commentators began to pick apart every second of the interview. Body language experts were invited onto morning shows to analyze his expression. Some noted how his eyes flickered slightly before answering. Others observed how his tone softened, as though he were choosing every word carefully. These subtle details only deepened the intrigue. Even the podcast team, caught off guard by the viral explosion, released a short statement saying they hadn't expected that particular question to make headlines. But by then, the clip had already become one of the most viewed podcast moments of the year. It wasn't just entertainment, it had become an international talking point. Inside royal circles, the timing of the answer didn't go unnoticed. Only weeks before, King Charles had been seen making subtle public gestures to extend an olive branch toward his younger son. Small signs that perhaps reconciliation was still possible. Some royal watchers speculated that Harry's comment was a strategic decision to avoid adding more distance between himself and the family. By confirming he had no plans to become a citizen, he was, in a quiet way, signaling respect. But others interpreted the moment as deeply personal, not political. The look on Harry's face when he spoke those words wasn't calculated. It was reflective. It was as though he had finally accepted that no matter where he lives, part of him will always belong to the world he left behind. The production team later described how the room felt when Harry gave his answer. "It wasn't awkward," one staff member recalled. "It was more like everyone sensed he had just said something honest, something that mattered to him. Honesty from royalty, even former royalty, still carries weight. It cuts through the polish, and for a brief instant, Harry wasn't a duke or a global figure. He was just a man explaining where his heart stands. What's fascinating about this moment is how it unfolded without intention. Hassan Minhaj, ever the quick-witted host, had asked hundreds of questions like that in his career, but this one landed differently. It wasn't political or invasive, it was simple, direct, and human. And yet, it became one of the most defining questions Harry has faced since leaving Britain. Because behind that question was another one. What does Prince Harry really want to be? The idea of citizenship is symbolic. It represents belonging, loyalty, and the willingness to tie your identity to a nation. For Harry, that symbolism is heavy. Becoming an American citizen would have meant officially renouncing allegiance to his father, the king. Even if the process is largely ceremonial, the optics would have been seismic. For a royal who spent years trying to step away from the institution without betraying it, the gesture would have been irreversible. That's why, when he said no plans at this point, it wasn't avoidance, it was preservation. Preservation of choice, of connection, of identity. He's left the palace walls behind, but not the lineage that shaped him. And yet, there was a quiet melancholy beneath the statement. The same tone that appeared when he spoke of losing his mother or his struggles within the royal system. Harry has always been a man of contradictions. Longing for normalcy while being drawn into public life, craving privacy while using his platform to speak out. His answer, in a sense, captured that duality perfectly. In the days following the podcast, fans online debated the meaning of his words. Some argued that Harry's hesitation was strategic, that he was leaving the door open for change if circumstances demanded it. Others thought it revealed his emotional struggle, an admission that despite finding happiness in California, he still feels tethered to the monarchy in ways he can't entirely explain. On British television, morning hosts debated whether the Duke of Sussex was playing it safe or simply being sincere. One commentator remarked, "You can take the prince out of the palace, but you can't take the palace out of the prince." Another countered that Harry had every right to hold on to his nationality, that rejecting citizenship wasn't rejection of America but affirmation of identity. But beyond the noise, there was something undeniably human in his answer. Every immigrant, every expatriate, every person who has ever moved far from home understands that complicated mix of freedom and longing. You can build a new life, but the old one lingers in your bones. And for Prince Harry, the old life wasn't just a place. It was a legacy, a crown, a lineage stretching back 1,000 years. Walking away from that doesn't happen with a flight or a signature, it happens slowly over time if it happens at all. When the podcast episode ended, Harry thanked Hassan warmly, exchanged a few more jokes, and walked out of the studio into the California sun. Outside, photographers waited as always. But this time, the questions weren't about his charity work or his marriage. They were about his words. No plans at this point. The world often forgets that even public figures live through private uncertainties. For Harry, this wasn't a political moment. It was a glimpse into a life still in transition. A reminder that freedom is never clean-cut, and identity doesn't fit neatly into legal categories. That's why this moment matters. Because in those few seconds of honesty, Prince Harry didn't just answer a question about citizenship. He revealed the truth about his journey, the push and pull between two worlds, the cost of choice, and the ongoing search for where he truly belongs. As the headlines continue to echo and experts offer their interpretations, the man behind the microphone has likely already moved on. But for millions watching, that single sentence lingers in the air like a whisper from a man still learning what it means to be free. And that's how a simple question, asked on a casual podcast, became a global story. One that reminds us that even princes must face the question that defines us all. Where is home? There's a subtle art to saying everything while appearing to say very little. Prince Harry has mastered that art through years of royal life, where every phrase must be measured, Every word weighed against the potential storm it could unleash. When he said, "There are no plans to be at this point," it was a sentence wrapped in politeness, but inside it sat a world of complexity. Those 8 words carried the weight of family, legacy, politics, and personal identity. It wasn't a refusal, but it wasn't acceptance either. It was a diplomatic pause. To the casual listener, it might have sounded like a simple answer, a polite way to dodge a question. But to those who've followed Harry's journey, the military veteran turned philanthropist, the royal turned California resident, it felt like something deeper. It was the kind of response that says, "I'm still figuring it out, but also, I know I can't say more than this." Because the truth is, Harry lives in a world where every statement becomes a headline. Did no plans mean he had considered it but changed his mind? Or that he still might? And what did, at this point, imply? Was there a future version of Harry who would reconsider? For those familiar with royal communication, such phrasing is never accidental. It's the product of conditioning. Decades spent learning how to speak without inflaming, how to reveal emotion without crossing the invisible line that separates personal truth from public controversy. Even after leaving the royal family, that training remains embedded in him. But beyond the surface, the choice of words reflects something more personal: uncertainty. When Harry said there were no plans, he wasn't shutting down the idea completely. He was leaving space for change, for possibility, for life to unfold. It was the response of a man who has learned that permanence is an illusion. After all, who would have believed 5 years ago that Prince Harry would be living in California, producing documentaries and speaking openly about therapy and mental health? If life can change that dramatically once, it can again. At the same time, the phrase also speaks to restraint. Harry knows the implications of citizenship better than most. Becoming a U.S. citizen wouldn't just be a personal milestone. It would be an international statement. It would raise questions about loyalty to his homeland, about his place in the royal line, and about the symbolism of a prince taking allegiance to another country. Those implications aren't lost on him. To truly understand the depth of his words, it helps to revisit his earlier interviews. In 2021, not long after moving to California, Harry admitted during a casual conversation that he had considered applying for citizenship. The statement then was taken as evidence that he was ready to cut all remaining ties with the royal family. At the time, it fit the narrative: the rebel prince escaping the constraints of monarchy to live freely under the sun. But even then, his tone was cautious. He never said he would do it, only that he thought about it. 3 years later, the story has changed. Life in America has brought both freedom and scrutiny. While the couple's new ventures have given them independence, they've also exposed them to a level of public skepticism that's different from royal life, but no less relentless. In Britain, Harry was judged for being a royal. In America, he's judged for what kind of royal he chooses to be. Becoming a U.S. citizen might seem like the natural next step, but for someone like Harry, nothing is ever that simple. There's also the emotional dimension. Citizenship isn't just paperwork. It's identity. For someone who has spent his entire life navigating questions of belonging, switching national allegiances could feel like another identity crisis. Harry has already lost titles, military roles, and public standing. To give up his nationality, even symbolically, might feel like erasing one more part of himself. And yet, the alternative, remaining a permanent outsider in America, carries its own weight. This tension lies at the heart of his statement. No plans at this point could just as easily mean, "I'm not ready." It's a declaration of pause, not permanence. It suggests that Harry is still in motion, still trying to find where he fits between two worlds that both claim him and reject him in equal measure. Political analysts have also pointed out another layer: optics. For Harry to take American citizenship would create a constitutional oddity. As a British prince, even one not actively serving in the royal family, pledging allegiance to another country would raise legal and diplomatic questions. Would he have to renounce his titles? Would his children's royal status be affected? Would his tax obligations change? These are not trivial concerns, and Harry knows it. Then there's the personal cost. If Harry were to become a U.S. citizen, It would mean formally pledging loyalty to a government that his family's monarchy represents from the opposite side. For the average immigrant, the oath of citizenship is a proud declaration. But for the son of a king, the act carries symbolism that can't be ignored. Saying, "I renounce allegiance to any foreign prince or sovereign," would not just be ceremonial. It would be an emotional fracture. It would be renouncing his father by law. That's why his answer, understated as it was, spoke volumes. It wasn't indecision. It was a careful balance between truth and diplomacy, between wanting to honor his new life and needing to preserve the remnants of his old one. Yet, in the way he phrased it, at this point, there's also a quiet acknowledgement that time changes everything. Harry's life has been a series of evolutions, each one shaped by love, loss, and the constant pursuit of authenticity. Perhaps he knows that even if citizenship isn't in his plans today, it doesn't mean it never will be. Observers who know him personally say Harry has grown more introspective in recent years. He has spoken openly about therapy, mindfulness, and the need to heal from the traumas of his past. Those close to him describe a man deeply reflective about his choices. It's possible that, for now, avoiding such a permanent step as citizenship is less about loyalty and more about self-understanding. He's learning to live without defining himself by institutions, royal or national. But the world is not patient with nuance. The headlines didn't quote his full thought. They froze the moment into a single declaration. Prince Harry rules out becoming a U.S. citizen. That's how news works. It compresses complexity into sound bites, leaving the truth somewhere in between. Behind the scenes, aides and friends likely knew this would happen. They've watched how even Harry's smallest remarks ignite days of analysis. It's the price of being him. His life permanently under the microscope, his words treated as political acts. Still, the tone of his voice in that podcast mattered more than the words themselves. There was no bitterness, no frustration, just calm. The voice of a man who's found a measure of peace with uncertainty. In that sense, no plans at this point become something almost philosophical. It's not indecision, it's acceptance that not every path must be defined. And yet, there's an underlying sadness there too. The idea that after years of searching for freedom, Harry still can't fully belong anywhere. He's too British to be American, too Americanized to be fully royal again. He lives in a house surrounded by sunshine and ocean views, but somewhere inside, the shadows of heritage remain. That's what makes his story resonate beyond royalty. Everyone, at some point, faces the same question. Where do you belong? For most people, the answer comes quietly. For Harry, it comes under lights, on microphones, and across international headlines. Even Hassan Minhaj seemed to sense the weight of the answer. He nodded slowly, as if recognizing that he had stumbled upon something real, then pivoted to a lighter question. But for viewers, that sentence echoed long after the laughter returned. The subtle beauty of Harry's response lies in its restraint. It reflects a man who has learned that speaking plainly can be dangerous, but speaking thoughtfully can be powerful. It's the language of someone who has seen too many words turned against him. By saying little, he said everything. In that pause before his answer, in the slight tension of his jaw, you can see the internal dialogue. One part of him tempted to speak freely, another part reminding him of the consequences. That tension is the essence of his life story. The constant negotiation between authenticity and control. And perhaps that's why so many people were drawn to this moment. Because beyond the politics and the speculation, it was honest. Not rehearsed or performed, just honest. A prince who has been defined by the institutions around him, trying to define himself on his own terms. When you listen closely to that clip, you can almost hear the sigh beneath the words. Not of regret, but of recognition. A sigh that says, I've thought about it, I've lived through it, and for now this is where I stand. And that's the truth behind no plans at this point. It isn't about passports or paperwork. It's about a man who has lived two lives and is still trying to make peace between them. For most people, becoming a citizen of another country is a straightforward, personal decision. An act of belonging, an affirmation of where they see their future. But for Prince Harry, that choice carries an avalanche of consequences that go far beyond the personal. His citizenship is not just about where he lives or pays taxes. It's about identity, loyalty, history, and power. It's about what happens when a man born to one of the most powerful families in the world chooses to legally belong to another nation. To understand why Prince Harry's words, "There are no plans to be at this point," carry such weight, you have to understand the price of what he would give up if he ever decided to become an American. On paper, it's a legal process. In reality, it's a dismantling of heritage. If Harry were to apply for U.S. citizenship, the first and most symbolic consequence would be the oath of allegiance. Every American citizen, whether born or naturalized, must pledge loyalty to the United States and renounce allegiance to any foreign prince, potentate, or sovereign. For Harry, the son of King Charles III, those words wouldn't just be ceremonial, they would be seismic. He would, quite literally, be swearing an oath against his father's position as monarch. That line alone, "I renounce all allegiance to any foreign prince or sovereign," is the point of no return. Even though many immigrants take the oath with no political controversy, for Harry, the world would read it as a public rejection of the monarchy itself. A symbolic fracture from the House of Windsor. He would no longer just be a prince who left the palace. He'd be a prince who swore loyalty to another flag. Then comes the issue of his title. As the Duke of Sussex, Harry's peerage was granted by the late Queen Elizabeth II. If he were to take U.S. citizenship, the British establishment would be forced to re-examine whether a foreign national could continue to use a royal title. While there's no absolute legal precedent for such a case, the royal household has always viewed allegiance to the crown as a condition of holding titles. Citizenship could complicate that understanding. Some insiders believe it would create immense constitutional discomfort, especially for King Charles, who has spent his reign trying to preserve the monarchy's dignity while navigating the global era of media exposure. For a royal family that prizes symbolism, Harry's hypothetical oath would feel like betrayal, even if he didn't mean it that way. It would be perceived as severing a link that's not supposed to be broken. And that perception alone would have diplomatic ripples. Beyond symbolism, there's the practical side. U.S. citizenship comes with global taxation, a system that demands citizens declare their income from all over the world, not just within America. Harry's financial life is international. He earns from book deals, speaking engagements, and media contracts that cross borders. Becoming an American citizen would mean subjecting all of that to IRS scrutiny. Even with expert accountants and legal teams, it would mean endless complexity. For someone who has already fought battles over privacy and control, the idea of the U.S. government accessing his global financial records could be unnerving. It's also worth noting that as a high-profile figure, his every transaction would attract attention. Public filings, scrutiny from watchdogs, and even potential leaks could expose aspects of his financial life that he's tried so hard to protect. For a man who spent the last few years fighting for privacy, against tabloids, paparazzi, and the British press, citizenship could feel like surrendering a new form of it. Then there's security. As a member of the royal family, Harry's protection has always been a complicated topic. After stepping down from royal duties, his official security was reduced. In America, he pays for private protection, but his status as a British national still offers certain diplomatic considerations when traveling or attending international events. Becoming a U.S. citizen would potentially change that dynamic. He would no longer be entitled to the quiet privileges that come with being a British royal abroad. It would also complicate his relationship with the British government. Even though he's not an active working royal, he still represents, by birth, the institution of the monarchy. U.S. citizenship could raise uncomfortable questions about whether he can still participate in royal events, military commemorations, or public duties involving British institutions. For example, his honorary military titles were already suspended after his departure in 2020. Citizenship might seal that separation permanently. To Harry, who served 2 tours in Afghanistan and has always taken pride in his military identity, that loss would cut deep. His connection to the armed forces remains one of the few aspects of his royal life that he continues to hold with pride. The Invictus Games, which he founded for wounded veterans, stands as proof of his enduring bond. There is an old saying that freedom isn't free. For Prince Harry, that phrase has never been more literal. On the surface, the idea of becoming a U.S. citizen might seem straightforward. A formality, a bureaucratic step to cement the life he's already living. But for Harry, citizenship comes with a cost that is more than financial. It touches on loyalty, legality, and identity. It's about who he is, who he was born to be, and who he's allowed to become. The moment a member of the British royal family pledges allegiance to another nation, even symbolically, it disrupts centuries of royal protocol. Every monarch and royal is bound by a delicate network of legal, historical, and symbolic responsibilities. For Harry, taking an oath of allegiance to the United States would mean swearing to renounce allegiance to any foreign prince, potentate, or sovereign. Those words are not ceremonial for him, they are personal. That oath would, in essence, mean renouncing allegiance to his father, King Charles III. The magnitude of such a gesture cannot be overstated. Harry's royal lineage is more than heritage. It's an institution that exists in a constant state of balance with the world. If he were to renounce it, even indirectly, it would cause a ripple through diplomatic channels, tabloids, and public consciousness alike. His very name carries legal implications, and that name is tied to the crown. But the cost isn't just political or symbolic, it's practical. Harry's financial life is already complex, divided between income from his US-based business ventures and trust funds tied to the British system. Becoming a US citizen would require him to file taxes on worldwide income, regardless of where that money originates. It would also expose him to the full scope of US tax law, something few royal financial advisors would dare to navigate lightly. At present, Harry likely holds a special immigration status, perhaps a green card or O-1 visa, designed for individuals with extraordinary ability, that allows him to live and work in the United States legally without the obligations of citizenship. It's an ideal arrangement, freedom without renunciation. But it also means he exists in a gray zone, not quite American, not quite British in the traditional sense. If he became a U.S. citizen, every aspect of his life would change on paper. The U.S. government would expect him to pay taxes on his global earnings, including profits from his inheritance and the sales of his book, Spare. His security expenses, already a point of contention with British authorities, would also fall fully on him. The financial independence he has built with Meghan Markle through Archwell Productions, media deals, and public speaking would suddenly carry heavier tax obligations. The couple's fortune, carefully structured between trusts and foundations, would come under increased scrutiny. But the most delicate cost of all might be diplomatic. Members of the royal family, even those who step back from official duties, are expected to maintain a sense of neutrality. They cannot serve as representatives of foreign nations, nor can they engage in partisan politics. If Harry became an American citizen, it would place him in an impossible position, subject to the laws and loyalties of a country whose political system thrives on open partisanship. Every comment he makes about social issues, every appearance at an event, would risk being interpreted through a political lens. This tension isn't new for Harry. Since moving to California, he's walked a tightrope between activism and diplomacy. He has spoken passionately about mental health, climate change, and social responsibility, issues that are political by nature but which he frames as humanitarian. Citizenship would blur that line even more. A U.S. passport might grant him legal belonging, but it would strip him of the plausible neutrality that being a British prince still offers. There is also a layer of emotional cost. The royal identity, for all its constraints, provides a sense of grounding. It is not merely a title but a framework of purpose and recognition. Even after stepping away, Harry remains the Duke of Sussex. Those words connect him to something larger than himself, a sense of duty, history, and continuity that no amount of California sunshine can replace. If he became an American citizen, those titles could be reconsidered or even revoked by the crown, depending on interpretation. The monarchy has always been sensitive about matters of allegiance. For Harry, that possibility would cut deep. His dukedom was one of the few honors given to him by his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, on his wedding day. Losing it would not only be a symbolic rejection but an emotional one. It would sever one of his last direct links to her legacy, a legacy he still reveres despite his conflicts with the institution. Another hidden cost lies in the question of his children. Archie and Lilibet are American citizens by birth, but they are also entitled to British citizenship through Harry. If their father were to renounce his own, the implications for their future titles and inheritances could become legally complicated. The children's ability to inherit royal privileges or property could be questioned. Harry's decision, then, is not just his, it shapes the identity of his family for generations. In a way, this is the paradox of Harry's life. He fought so hard to escape the confines of the royal system, yet he remains tethered to it by invisible threads: legal, emotional, historical. Every step toward independence risks unraveling something he still values. Every act of rebellion carries consequences that reach beyond him. Some legal scholars in Britain have even suggested that Harry's citizenship decision could trigger constitutional discussions about royal titles and succession. Although he and his children are far from the throne, the monarchy guards its lineage carefully. A prince who becomes a foreign citizen creates uncomfortable precedent. It blurs the lines of what being royal means in a globalized age. Beyond all of this, there's the matter of public perception. The British public, already divided on Harry's choices, would see his citizenship as the final betrayal. The narrative would write itself: the prince who turned his back on his country. Meanwhile, in the United States, he might still face suspicion. Despite his relocation, he is often viewed as privileged, foreign, and insulated from the realities of ordinary life. His words about empathy and mental health are powerful, but to some Americans, they come from a man who will never have to struggle for survival. Citizenship might not erase that perception, it could even amplify it. The media would not let the story fade easily. For months, tabloids would churn out headlines about the American prince. Politicians might even use his name in debates about privilege, immigration, and loyalty. And for someone who has spent years trying to reclaim privacy, that kind of attention would be suffocating. So when Harry said he had no plans to be at this point, it was not avoidance, it was awareness. Awareness of all these layers: financial, diplomatic, emotional, and personal. It was the understanding that some choices, once made, cannot be undone. He knows better than anyone how irreversible decisions can shape a lifetime. The cost of citizenship, then, is not just about what he would gain, a passport, a vote, a symbol of new beginnings, but about what he would lose: the ability to stand as both insider and outsider, critic and participant, son and exile. His unique position, as difficult as it is, gives him influence and perspective that neither full British nor full American identity could replicate. And perhaps that's what makes his choice so deliberate. Harry has never been one to make decisions for optics. His life, for better or worse, has been shaped by conviction, sometimes impulsive, often emotional, but always rooted in authenticity. He knows that becoming a U.S. citizen would please some and outrage others. But the man who walked away from the royal family to protect his mental health has learned that peace matters more than approval. For now, he has chosen to keep his balance, living under the Californian sun, but carrying a British heart. He can drive down the Pacific Coast Highway without security convoys, attend his children's school events without royal protocol, and speak on his own terms. But he also knows that every freedom he enjoys comes with a shadow, the knowledge that he will never fully belong to one world or the other. That's the true cost of citizenship for Prince Harry. Not money, not paperwork, not political drama, but the loss of identity that comes from having to choose between two halves of himself. For most people, identity is something they build piece by piece over a lifetime, where they live, who they love, the work they do, the culture they grow into. For Prince Harry, identity was something handed to him at birth, fully formed and publicly defined. From the moment he opened his eyes to the world, he wasn't just a child. He was a symbol, a continuation of a bloodline stretching back centuries. And that is precisely what made his decision to step away from royal life so profound. It wasn't simply about leaving an institution. It was about dismantling the foundation of who he had always been told to be. Since moving to California, Harry has faced a quiet war within himself, an identity crisis born of collision between two worlds that could not be more different. On one side stands the crown with its duty, hierarchy, and restraint. On the other, California with its freedom, individuality, and self-expression. Both claim him, yet neither completely defines him. Every morning in Montecito, Harry wakes up in a world that could not feel further from the one that shaped him. The ocean hums softly in the distance. The air smells of eucalyptus and sun-warmed soil, and the silence is a far cry from the echoes of palace corridors. And yet, no matter how far he moves, he carries the structure of royalty in his bones. There's a certain posture, a certain tone, a certain sense of decorum that never leaves someone raised to be part of the firm. Even now, when he laughs with friends or sits cross-legged during a podcast, there's a flicker of formality behind the ease, a lifetime of etiquette that cannot be unlearned. It's this duality that fuels his ongoing struggle. To outsiders, Harry's transformation might seem complete. He has traded state banquets for charity galas, palace courtyards for Californian gardens. He no longer bows or curtsies, no longer follows the strict hierarchy of royal rank. But emotionally, he's still tethered to the life he left behind. And that tether is both comfort and curse. The royal identity isn't just a title. It's a mindset, one built on the principle of service. From a young age, Harry was taught that his existence was not his own, that every smile, every handshake, every appearance carried weight. His life was not a personal narrative. It was part of a collective one, a story of continuity and stability. Walking away from that isn't as simple as buying a plane ticket. It's like learning to breathe in a new atmosphere. When he and Meghan first settled in California, there was a visible transformation. For the first time, he seemed to breathe freely. He talked openly about therapy, about mental health, about breaking generational cycles of silence. He was finding his voice, one that had always been muffled by royal protocol. Yet, with every new expression of freedom came backlash from the British press, accusing him of hypocrisy, of turning his back on duty while still benefiting from royal privilege. And so the cycle continued. Escape followed by judgment, independence shadowed by expectation. Experts in psychology have often described identity crises as periods when a person's internal values no longer align with the roles they occupy. Harry embodies that perfectly. For most of his life, he was Prince Harry, the mischievous younger son, the soldier prince, the loyal support act to his brother, the symbol of a modern monarchy. Then suddenly the roles collapsed. He was no longer the soldier, no longer a working royal, no longer the one who stood behind the future king. Stripped of structure, he was forced to answer a question few royals ever confront. Who am I when I'm not Prince Harry? That question haunted him long before California. Even in his 20s, Harry struggled with the disconnect between public perception and private reality. He was portrayed as rebellious, wild, undisciplined. Yet, those who knew him described a man searching desperately for purpose, haunted by the trauma of losing his mother and trapped in an environment that rewarded silence over sincerity. His years in the military offered temporary clarity. There he was just Captain Wales, part of a team, a man among men. For once, his title didn't matter. But when he returned to civilian life, the spotlight reclaimed him, and the conflict resumed. In California, that conflict deepened in new ways. He had escaped the palace but not the pressure. The American lifestyle, casual, expressive, independent, offered him a kind of freedom he had never known, yet it also challenged his sense of belonging. In Britain, people questioned his loyalty. In America, people questioned his authenticity. He was too royal to be ordinary, too outspoken to be traditional. Meghan, for her part, understood the struggle. Having built her identity from the ground up, she often encouraged him to embrace reinvention. But reinvention, for Harry, was not as simple as changing careers or relocating. It required unlearning decades of conditioning. Every public statement still felt like a negotiation between who he was expected to be and who he wanted to become. His memoir, Spare, was perhaps the clearest window into this crisis. The very title revealed how he saw himself: secondary, supplementary, the extra royal whose purpose was defined by proximity to the heir. The book was raw, emotional, and unapologetically human. It stripped away the armor of protocol and exposed a man still wrestling with the meaning of self-worth. But even that act of vulnerability reignited the same criticism he'd tried to escape. British commentators accused him of airing family secrets, while American readers praised his honesty. Once again, he found himself caught between two versions of truth: the royal one, which prizes silence, and the Californian one, which celebrates expression. Identity for Harry has become a mirror, one that reflects two faces but never one complete image. There are moments when he appears fully at ease with his American surroundings, smiling beside Meghan at charity events, his sleeves rolled up, speaking from the heart. But there are also moments, quieter ones, where the old formality returns. A certain pause before answering, a flicker of guardedness, a reminder that even after leaving the monarchy, he still carries the instincts of a man raised under scrutiny. What makes Harry's crisis particularly complex is that he can never truly shed his royal identity. No matter how ordinary he tries to live, he will always be Prince Harry in the eyes of the world. His name is printed on history books, his face embedded in decades of royal archives. He cannot start over the way most people can. Every attempt at reinvention becomes a negotiation with history, and yet, there's a strange beauty in that struggle. Because in trying to define himself outside of royalty, Harry is doing what few royals have ever dared to do: live as a human being first. He has spoken about wanting to be known for his actions, not his ancestry. His work in mental health, his advocacy for veterans, his foundation's focus on community service, all reflect his desire to keep the best of the royal ethos while discarding the rigidity that made it suffocating. But even this balance is fragile. There are days when the pull of the old life resurfaces. A sense of duty, a longing for reconciliation, the instinct to protect the institution that shaped him. And then there are days when he feels the weight of everything he escaped: the coldness of hierarchy, the tabloid cruelty, the loss of privacy. His crisis is not a phase. It's a condition, one that will likely follow him for life. In interviews, Harry often uses the word journey. It's a term that recurs whenever he talks about healing or identity. The word itself suggests movement, not resolution. And that may be the truest reflection of where he stands now, a man no longer confined by a system but still learning how to live without one. What he faces is the universal challenge of anyone who's ever left behind a defining structure, whether it's a career, a religion, or a family expectation. When you leave the only world you've ever known, you don't simply walk into freedom. You walk into uncertainty. And uncertainty, though liberating, can be terrifying. Prince Harry's royal identity crisis is not just a story about privilege or rebellion. It's a human story about searching for meaning when the roles that once defined you disappear. It's about realizing that home is not always where you were born, and belonging is not something that can be inherited. For now, he continues to live in the space halfway between two countries, two cultures, two selves. And in that space, he's building something new, something fragile but real. He may never stop being a prince by name, but perhaps, at last, he's learning how to be Harry by choice. The contrast between Harry's two worlds could not be sharper. Britain, where he was born, is steeped in ritual and history, its royal traditions woven into the nation's identity. California, where he now lives, thrives on freedom, reinvention, and informality. One values silence, the other values self-expression. One demands duty, the other celebrates choice. Between those worlds, Harry has built a life that is both liberating and disorienting, a collision of two realities that often seem at odds. In Britain, every aspect of royal life is prescribed. There is a correct way to stand, to speak, to smile, to mourn. Every public event unfolds according to ancient choreography designed to maintain the monarchy's image of continuity and dignity. The royals represent the nation, not themselves. Personal expression is secondary to tradition. Even emotions are filtered through protocol. Joy, grief, and anger must all be presented with restraint. California, however, could not be more different. It is the global capital of self-expression, a place where therapy is common conversation, where people build careers on sharing their stories, and where authenticity is a form of currency. In Britain, privacy is sacred. In California, transparency is power. For Harry, moving between these two environments is like stepping from shadow into sunlight, only to realize that too much light can be just as blinding. When he first arrived, California seemed like paradise. The beaches, the casual warmth of strangers, the quiet anonymity of Montecito, all of it was intoxicating. After years of living under palace scrutiny, the freedom to walk outside without a press officer or a security briefing must have felt surreal. Friends describe him as almost giddy in those early months, exploring grocery stores and cafes with Meghan, discovering what normal life felt like. But the cultural divide soon revealed itself in subtle ways. British modesty clashed with American confidence. In royal life, self-promotion is frowned upon. In California, it's expected. When Harry and Meghan began speaking openly about their mental health, about family struggles, about the cost of royal life, the reaction from Britain was outrage. Royals don't talk like that, commentators said. But in America, those same confessions were celebrated as brave and relatable. It was the first sign that Harry's new home operated by different rules. In California, vulnerability isn't weakness, it's authenticity. Yet for someone raised to guard emotion behind a polished smile, that kind of openness can feel both liberating and dangerous. He was learning to speak a new cultural language, one built on sharing, not hiding. The contrast extended into every corner of his life. In Britain, status is inherited. In California, it's earned or at least performed. Harry had grown up in a world where his title defined him. In America, titles meant little. Here, influence comes from visibility, from narrative, from connection. The people around him, actors, producers, entrepreneurs, built their reputations through storytelling. For them, the ability to control one's public image was a skill, not a privilege. Harry, on the other hand, had spent his life being defined by others. In this new culture, he found both opportunity and confusion. On one hand, the freedom to shape his own story was empowering. On the other, the idea of branding himself felt foreign. He wasn't used to thinking of his life as content or his experiences as marketable. Yet, in California, the line between personal truth and public performance is thin. Every documentary, every interview, every speech became a negotiation between sincerity and optics. Even the rhythm of life was different. In Britain, his schedule had been dictated by palace courtiers and royal calendars. Every engagement planned to the minute, every wardrobe choice approved. In California, there was no such structure. He could wake up when he wanted, attend his son's preschool events, or go for a morning run along the beach. But with freedom came something he hadn't anticipated: restlessness. Without the built-in sense of purpose royal life provided, he found himself having to create meaning from scratch. Meghan adapted more easily. As an American actress turned advocate, she understood the culture of reinvention. She encouraged Harry to see California not as an escape but as a blank page. Still, there were moments of tension. Meghan's ease with public expression, her ability to speak openly about causes, emotions, and experiences, sometimes contrasted with Harry's instinct for privacy. He admired her confidence, but part of him remained wary of how open was too open. California also introduced him to a new kind of fame. Royal fame is inherited and institutional. It's not something one can control or expand. Hollywood fame, however, thrives on relevance. It demands constant visibility, constant narrative renewal. Suddenly, Harry wasn't just a prince. He was a public figure in a media landscape that moves at the speed of scandal. Every project he launched, every statement he made, was judged not just for content but for entertainment value. This was the cultural divide in its purest form. Britain measures credibility by restraint. America measures it by exposure. The very qualities that had earned him respect in one world, discretion, humility, formality, were liabilities in the other. To thrive in California, he had to learn to be louder, more open, more emotionally available. But every time he spoke, the old British voice inside him whispered caution. The divide extended beyond culture into community. In Britain, his circle had been composed of aristocrats, soldiers, and long-standing friends from Eton. In California, his social world included actors, philanthropists, and entrepreneurs. The conversations were different too. In Britain, small talk was a way to avoid vulnerability. In California, it was a doorway to it. People asked about therapy, childhood trauma, spiritual growth, topics that would make most British royals visibly uncomfortable. At first, Harry's guardedness set him apart. But over time, he began to adapt. He learned that vulnerability could coexist with strength, that sharing pain could build bridges instead of headlines. In interviews, his tone softened. He spoke less like a prince delivering statements and more like a man telling stories. It was an evolution that symbolized more than a cultural shift. It was an emotional awakening. Still, the tension never fully disappeared. There are days when he misses the quiet order of Britain, the sense of structure that royal life provided. The predictability of duty can be comforting, especially for someone who grew up in chaos. And yet, returning is impossible. The world he left no longer fits him, and the world he's joined still doesn't fully understand him. This divide between Crown and California isn't a line he can cross or erase. It's the space where he now exists, half-rooted in each, belonging entirely to neither. It's where he raises his children, teaches them to love both their British heritage and their American home. It's where he tries to reconcile the formality of his upbringing with the freedom of his new life. If Britain gave him discipline, California gave him expression. If the Crown taught him duty, California taught him choice. The challenge for Harry is not choosing between them but weaving them together into something whole. That process is ongoing. He still bows instinctively when greeting elders, still carries himself with a posture that reveals his royal training. Yet, he now wears jeans instead of uniforms, sneakers instead of polished boots. He meditates instead of marching. He speaks in interviews instead of at ceremonies. His life has become a fusion of two worlds that rarely meet. California, with all its contradictions, its glamour, its openness, its relentless optimism, has forced him to redefine what purpose means outside of royal duty. It has also reminded him that freedom, while intoxicating, can feel lonely when you've been part of something larger than yourself. In quiet moments, perhaps while watching the Pacific waves with his children, he must feel the paradox of it all. He left the Crown seeking peace, and yet, the search for identity continues. Because while you can leave a system, you can't always leave the person it made you. Politics has always been a forbidden language for the royal family. For generations, members of the monarchy have existed above the partisan fray, smiling through elections, avoiding opinions, and standing as symbols of unity in a country divided by politics.